hello. Thank you, Dr. Rubin, Dr. Jaimie Rubin, for joining us today. We are continuing our series around demystifying sports psychology and mental health in sports by interviewing experts that are in this space. And I am so delighted to have Dr. Jaimie Rubin join us today. She is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Premier Sports Psychology in Minneapolis, and she has her doctorate degree in psychology with a focus on sports psychology, and also has her master's in athletic counseling. I know, Dr. Rubin, we are really excited to bring you on, just having connected with you in the past. You have worked with athletes, coaches, and teams at Division 1, 2, and 3 institutions. You yourself were a point guard for a women's basketball team in college. And I think a lot of your work that explores issues around diversity and inclusion in sport could be really interesting for our audience here today too. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Really honored and excited to get to talk with you more and your audience and all your student athletes that I'm sure are engaging with you and your platform in a really amazing way.
First off, let's start by having you share a bit more to our audience about your journey. How did you go from being, college athlete to where you sit today in your postdoctoral fellowship?
I would say my journey to becoming a sports psychologist or going in this direction probably started in high school. As you mentioned, I was a point guard, so I was always a facilitator of sorts, always assisting others to perform at their best level. That's sort of how I saw my job in leadership, but also just on the court. And it was what I loved about it. But I got injured several times in high school and had a number of knee surgeries. And during that time, I actually saw a sports psychologist, and it wasn't the best experience for me. And for me at the time, it could have been that I wasn't ready. It could have not been the best fit. So important for us to understand your own readiness for seeking out sports psychology, for working on your mental health. Important for us to understand best fit, and that if it doesn't fit right away, there's a match out there for you. So that's why I like to throw that part out there. But it wasn't a great fit, and the reason it wasn't a great fit is part of why I do what I do now and how I do it now, which is that I really want to see the whole person. I really want that person to feel seen, to feel valued, to understand themselves on the field, court, pool, whatever it may be, and off, and really understand that whole person. And that's what I felt like was missing from my experience. And it kind of drove me into this field. When I got to college, we actually had the luxury at my college to also have a sports psychologist working with teams there. And I got to see sports psychology in a different light. And it looked really awesome and cool, kind of spoke right in line with how I wanted to work with athletes, or how I thought it could be a really beneficial service, whether that's on the individual, team level, department-wide level, understanding the importance of mental health and performance enhancement. And so that really drove that passion even further. That's what drove me to getting my master's degree from Springfield College in athletic counseling, which I had an amazing experience there. I always say that I was really lucky because the more I did the work, the more I loved it. That's not always true for everybody, but for me it was. And so I was really lucky in that realm. And so I got my master's, and then I knew I just really didn't want to have a ceiling when working with athletes. Not that I think that staying at the master's level or getting your degree or your certification, a CMPC, would put a ceiling on you, but I really wanted to go beyond that, understand the mental health, the psychology, underlying foundations of how people get where they are, how they manage stress, what's making them the way that they're, behaving, or the way that they're thinking or acting, and how do we work on exploring, again, like I said, that whole person and really supporting them from all angles. I didn't want to have sort of a ceiling on how I could support an athlete. And so I decided to go on for my doctorate, also at Springfield College in counseling psychology. And that's how I got to where I am.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. I know it was a big question, and I kind of set you up there. But there's a lot actually I want to unpack on what you said, starting with the fact that it was rooted in your own experience as an athlete. And, I love what you said about the fit being so important. Can you talk more about that? And sort of, you mentioned the whole person approach that you take. I think that'd just be really interesting for our audience to learn more about.
Yeah, I think that the match between a person and their, I'll just use the general term of therapist, which could include counselor, sports psychologist, psychiatrist, any of the versions of what we have out there in terms of support services. That match is super important, and it could be created for any number of reasons. It could be based on identity. It could be based on, or identity factors. It could be based on the topics that you have most interest in learning about, or the things you have most need for, whether that's you're struggling with an eating disorder, or you identify as gay, or you come from a certain type of background, or you're an international student athlete. It could be any number of factors that really it's important to pay attention to. And I always say to athletes, or student athletes in that matter, that, you're really in the room. So your experience, what you bring into the room, who you are, is really critical to consider. And I want them to think about themselves. How does this feel for me? How does this fit work for me? How does this person make me feel in the room? And that doesn't mean that everything in the sports psych room or in the counseling room is always happy, or always positive, or always the best experience. Sometimes we go through really challenging things. In fact, a lot of the times we have challenging conversations, or we go through challenging experiences that deserve time to be worked through and talked through and felt. And those aren't always easy, but you want to be with a person that you feel like aligns with you, who understands you, who's interested in wanting to know you. I always encourage feedback, not just to change, but also to say, is this the best fit for you? Should we find you somebody who's really going to get at what you need, or going to meet your values in the way you want them met, or the way that needs to be met?
I agree. Yeah, that match is maybe the most important part of that relationship that you have. And the other thing I want to touch on further is helping our audience understand the difference between some of the terms that you've thrown out. So therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, master's in sports psychology, and how that is different from a PhD. Can you unpack that? Because I know learning about this as a novice has been enlightening, but also confusing at times.
And I will say that again, this kind of leans back on the fit thing. I do think the fit is really important. So almost regardless of degree, or almost regardless of certification, fit is going to really be important. So I wouldn't just only look at those things when you're meeting with somebody. We see that a lot. Oh, well, you don't have your doctorate, so you might not be smart enough, or you might not be educated enough, or you might not have the right certifications to help me, which may be true. Maybe they don't have the specific skill set that you need, but also may not be true. They might have the right fit for you. So there are lots of different versions. Even myself, I'm referred to in lots of different ways. But I think the most important distinction is that you can be licensed at either the doctorate level or the master's level. If you're licensed at the master's level, that might be somebody who's a clinical mental health provider, a licensed professional counselor, a social worker, or a licensed social worker. At the doctorate level, once you're licensed, you inherit the title of psychologist. And sort of as an aside to that, in the sport world, for sports psychologists, or for those licensed or not licensed at the master's level, we have a certification called the CMPC. And that's for specific to those practicing in the sport world. That's a separate certification. In terms of what are all those things, what does that really mean, is they're all kind of rooted in a different essence of their education, or of what they focus on. For me, athletic counseling versus, let's say, exercise science or sports psychology, so my master's degree, was really an integration of the the foundational pieces of counseling psychology and sports psychology, kind of bringing those together. That's where I get that whole person mentality from. Whereas if you have a degree or a certification that's more exercise science based, not to say that we didn't use exercise science, but more exercise science based, so specifically in sports psychology, they might have essences that are more in kinesthesiology or body mechanics or physiology. And it's just more about what their education is rooted in and maybe how it comes out in their practice. But I do know for those of us in counseling and clinical psychology, we're really rooted in things like the relationship, understanding the person, understanding factors that integrate into the person and the athlete, and how we can get that whole person out in the field, because we don't leave it at the door. We don't leave our personhood at the door, even though, maybe opposing to what some would want for athletes, or what athletes even sometimes want for themselves, to kind of leave part of them at the door. Can't always do that.
Why is that? What have you found in your work on why we need to be treating the whole person and treating, as much emphasis that we put on our physical health, we need to also be bringing that to our mindset and mental health?
I would say, because they all exist in you is the best answer I could give in terms of why do we need to support the whole person? Because that whole person is going to walk out onto that field, is going to jump into that pool, is going to run that race, is going to row that boat, whatever it may be. It's going to be that whole person. There's not to say that there's not times where we can enhance our performance or understand our mental health as through skills of compartmentalizing sometimes, or separating, or working on where and when do I spend my time navigating these things so that when I'm on the field, I can perform optimally, if that's the way you're going about your services. But the truth is that your physical health and your mental health, they all exist within you. And so addressing those are just foundational pieces. I was thinking about, or I was watching the interview with Dak Prescott. It was really powerful. And he just very succinctly addressed the idea that to address your mental health is to get yourself most ready to perform at your best. And that could be at a time where you really need, you need help, right? So like we're facing a mental health challenge of some sort, or it could be at times where you're not necessarily facing a challenge, but you need to enhance your mental game. So we work on the full spectrum.
No, I really like that, what you said about it. They're so related. I mean, as a former athlete, I think that oftentimes we'll be oriented towards that performance part, but we know the underlying factors around what's going on off the field, your stress level, your anxiety levels, your relationships are so definitely carry over onto the field. And so, for someone like yourself that can blend those two and look at both sides of that equation, I think that's really critical for understanding how you perform at your best and also feel at your best, which is our mission here at MyHuddle.
I was just going to, a little bit maybe demystify one thing about coming to see a sports psychologist or working in this realm, maybe before, I'm sure, maybe it'll address your question that you have, but so many times we see student athletes and athletes. I work with student athletes that from the high school level all the way through the professional level. And across the board, we see folks coming in for a performance concern. I can't focus as much as I want, or I'm getting stuck on a past mistake, or I'm feeling my levels of arousal are too high, and X, Y, and Z is not going well, or just in general, my performance isn't where I want it to be. And so we see people coming in like that often, and that is a perfectly acceptable and awesome reason to sort of come in. It doesn't mean that's always where we stay. In fact, a lot of times we have athletes coming in saying that, but really just trying to get in the door to figure out, is this going to be okay for me to talk about some of the deeper things that may be impacting my performance? And it's also okay to do that. And we're happy, as people on my side, I'm certainly happy to sit with and wait and be patient and build the relationship that's necessary to understand, what else might be deeper there that needs to be worked on. Again, that's also not to say that we don't have, first of all, that we don't have folks that aren't experiencing mental illness or a mental health concern or challenge. So it's not like every person that comes in with a performance issue, we're just waiting for them to get to their underlying anxiety. That might not be the case. So that's also okay. And the reverse true as well. For sports psychologists in particular, we have student athletes all the time, or athletes at all levels, coming in to manage their mental health. So really all is accepted and all can be brought out through, your sessions, and all can be worked on, hopefully worked together on.
Regardless of what sort of challenge you're facing, that you can be sort of that one-stop shop solution and work with individual athletes. I think that's, really alleviating, if I heard that, to say, oh, okay, I don't have to figure out all the different places I could go,
Right.
In your work and having been in this space, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions about sports psychology or mental health in athletics for student athletes today?
We're very commonly seen as like the Grim Reaper, meaning that like when we come around, you have a problem, or that there's something wrong with you. That's one that we have to destigmatize, really. I just want people to know that, there's nothing wrong with you. What you're experiencing is really important to pay attention to. It's telling you something. And that thing is valid. And we're a place where we can work on that together, where we can explore and process that together in order to enhance or get you ready enough to perform optimally. That's what we really want. So I think facing folks who think, when we come around, we're telling you there's something wrong or there's a problem, or if you come see us, there's something wrong with you, or there's a problem.
You are not the Grim Reaper.
Sometimes it's important to address that something is going on. That there is something that doesn't feel quite right, and that's okay.
And I know, here at MyHuddle, we're trying to shift the conversation to say that mental health is just like physical health, in the way that you treat your physical health proactively, or if you get an injury, you have to nurse that back to being healthy. The mind is on that same spectrum, and sort of saying that there's, yes, this world of mental performance and optimizing, finding your edge. And then there's your mental illnesses that can be clinically diagnosed or at a different degree, but everyone has their mental health continuum, just like you have your physical health continuum. So trying to shift, I think the discourse and words we're actually using can sometimes make it feel like you have to have an issue in order to work on your mental health.
100%. And we often support the notion that we need to treat mental health the way we do physical health. I'll take it one step further and say one of the things that's important when we use that kind of discourse is to understand what challenges come along with invisible injuries. We don't always see certain injuries. This is something we see when we work with student athletes that have concussions. They experience quite a different navigation of recovery than, let's say, somebody with a broken leg that's crutching around. The perception, the environment, the pressure, everything is really different in those kind of injuries. And so mental health really falls into a similar category as some of those invisible injuries. That's why sports psychology is so important, because we consider, or we're really educated on, but understanding of the environment, the pressures, the systemic issues that athletes face with regards to mental health, right? So again, when we think about Dak, for example, right away, then we have the backlash for expressing that he maybe experienced depression, and what that was like to be seen as weak. That's something that athletes face that not everybody does. So we really need to understand, what does it mean to demystify, to say it out loud, to normalize it as an athlete? The student athletes that we're all watching, they can very quickly shift away from what Dak said that was so validating and so normalizing, and look at all the comments on Twitter and all the news reports and all the things that were really bringing that back down to a level that wasn't highlighting how valuable that was, what he was talking about, and how important it was.
Yeah, I love that, the invisible injury, and also recognizing the specific challenges and pressures and demands that you face as a student athlete, which is why that discipline of sports psychology, exists, that there is a whole discipline around it. And I think compared to some other disciplines into the psychology world, it's a relatively nascent in specific area and focus. So I think that we're still seeing the growth of it and still seeing it be normalized and recognized and understood across the athlete community. I know that, one thing I mentioned to you before we were hopping on is that from polling our own audience that, athletes are managing a lot right now and navigating a lot of different challenges. And we really wanted to give our student athletes some tangible tools and tactics that they can be using right now. I would love to pick your brain, recognizing what student athletes are going through right now. Is there something that you could share with our audience that they could work through with you live here?
Absolutely. And I do want to get at just some underlying things. Your athletes are student athletes, but athletes in general across the board are really facing, as you said, a number of stressors. And it's so important that before we even get to sort of the mentality of how do we fix that, which I would normally say is how do we manage what we're experiencing, that we understand what is the impact of that stress, or what does stress look like. And the thing that we're seeing more than in the past is that even for athletes who are particularly adept at managing stress, beyond what they maybe think, that you actually have way more experience at managing challenges and stress than other folks. And so when we face the stress that we're currently facing right now, it can become even more distressing because we think we're supposed to be able to manage it. And for some reason in these last couple of months, we haven't been able to in the same way. And so it's important to recognize why this is different. The stressors that you're going through being in a pandemic, changing your whole social system, your whole educational system, managing social unrest and dealing with new issues around how we connect with others and how we see others and value others, especially with like loss of sport too. I think what we're seeing a lot of is a lot more loss that's tied up in the stress. And so normally we face stress as student athletes and athletes. That's a lot more to do with sort of pressure to perform. And right now, I think what we're seeing is just a lot more loss and grief, loss of season, loss of identity, loss of self-worth, loss of social connections, loss of people. And then on the other side of things, it's really important to highlight that for certain populations, they're experiencing loss in a lot of different ways, and they're experiencing trauma and re-traumatization through personal experience, as well as through news reporting and all that kind of stuff that makes this stress different. And so it's important to recognize that the stress is different. So your stress management should look different, and it should be important to you to take some time to understand what maybe needs to shift. It might not look the same as always. It's also important to understand that as stressors pile up, which is what we're seeing a lot of, you reach your threshold. So you might have been somebody that's always been like, I face stressors, I've been through things, I've overcome things, it's never been this hard. Well, maybe we just haven't reached a stress threshold for you, which we are now. When we, how I would normally explain it is, your cup is overflowing. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about yourself like a cup of water, as those stressors pile up, you're getting to the top. And then we start walking around with a full cup of water, and we're wondering why we're feeling so stressed, or we're feeling so protective or defensive, or we're isolating. Well, we're just afraid that if we move too quickly, or if somebody comes near us, or whatever it may be, that water will spill, and that will become an explosion of water and all our stressors. That's just a nice analogy.
I'm really glad you set the stage on that. I think it is really important to recognize that first. And actually, as you were sharing that, I was thinking about, is there a way that you recommend student athletes can identify what is causing them to feel stressful?
Also, we're not so used to, as student athletes kind of sitting with and reflecting on or asking ourselves. Especially, I shouldn't even say especially at the higher levels, because at any level, really, we're asked to perform. And that's really it. And beyond that, we're not necessarily asked on a consistent basis. How are we feeling? What emotion is coming up? Where is this coming from? What stressor am I facing right now? it's not always so acceptable to even say that you're experiencing a stress of any kind, let alone to sort of reflect on and try to understand that more. So, that is something that's particular to meeting individually with a sports psychologist or a counselor, is that you do have the space and room to sit with yourself, to reflect, to explore what are all the pieces here and how are they fitting together to create the experience that I'm having. Or to impact the experience that I'm having. Connecting socially and meeting yourself with self-compassion are probably two ways, like right off the bat, just across the board, not necessarily to understand what stressor you're experiencing, but to validate and normalize what you're feeling and what you're going through. We haven't been able to connect socially, so being really intentional and sharing with others what you're experiencing and listening to others about what they're experiencing can actually help you reflect on, well, what am I going through? And how do I meet this person where they're at, and how do I offer them empathy and compassion, and can I do that for myself? Sometimes we can recognize in others what we're going through, but we need to connect socially to do that. And then again, meeting yourself with self-compassion and understanding, so that you can start to be there for yourself too. But I would say, one of the things that I've been talking about, I call it getting revved up. And so this is definitely an individualized process, one that you might do on your own. And Revved Up is really just an acronym for reflecting, externalizing. It's really not the best part, but values, and then demonstration. And so when I say get revved up, I mean that you can engage yourself really in sitting down and reflecting. And we can do this through mindfulness exercises. I know you've gone over, there's some breathing exercises, so that's a good way of going through it. Or we can do this through journaling, writing. You can do a mindfulness write. But either way, giving yourself the time and space to sort of reflect on, what am I experiencing right now? And you can ask yourself in 3 questions, sort of, what are the thoughts that are coming up? What am I noticing in my thoughts? What emotions are coming up? What am I noticing? How am I feeling? And how's my body feeling? So it's really just centering yourself in the moment, which I know you maybe talked about in the past, but then also giving yourself time, specifically for that R, is to reflect on what's coming up. And then I would always say to, probably write it down is helpful, so that you can then reflect on, what are you writing down here, right? What's coming out? If I write this down, now I can spend some time. What's happening inside that I'm not observing, or I'm not attending to, that's saying something to me? As athletes, a lot of our emotions we're taught to kind of push down, but they're really telling you something. And so if you can sit and reflect on what emotion is coming up for me right now, that's going to communicate something to you. And that might be the doorway into, what's the stressor I'm facing right now? To externalize, to get back to the revved, to externalize is really getting into connecting with somebody else. To externalize that, to share it out loud. For some folks who might not be connected, I would say that writing can sometimes externalize it, really pull it out of your mind and kind of get it sort of on the paper where you can see it. But I would also recommend externalizing to others. Find somebody who you can externalize it to. Could be a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, right? It makes a big difference once we can share that, because we're going to find that hopefully we can gain some normalization, some validation, some compassion and empathy from others through that. We can also release it.
I was thinking that can be a really hard step, right? Again, going back to, if you're a student athlete, there's this tough it out, grind it out culture. That's a hard one, but I hope one that we can push back past, because I really believe that some of the people that are the most strong are the ones that are willing to be vulnerable. Finding that person that you trust and can open up to, it's really important. We all have that in our lives. So I think it's great that you mentioned how to do that. I just want to recognize also that if some people feel like, oh no, this is going to be a really hard step for me, that there's ways to, grow into that as well.
It's maybe not mandatory to externalize it to a person right now. But if you do, and you can, or even if you can take that step, it's a really powerful one. And like I said before, also connecting socially, externalizing it might first come from being there for somebody else. hearing it from them and trying to build trust that way and trying to be understanding. And so, and engage with them about what they're experiencing might be the first step there too.
Like that. I remember in college, for me, my roommates were critical. Actually, they didn't play soccer, so it was kind of nice because I could come home and talk about, what challenges I were facing. And a lot of times my roommates were saying, I'm sure you played great, don't worry about it. And it's just so nice to hear that, right? Sometimes you need that. A friend who, loves you for who you are, but might not be wrapped up as you are in your sport. So whether it's a teammate or another friend or sibling, cousin, I agree that those people that you surround yourself with are really important.
And so important what you just named, which was that you're more than that athletic identity. And that's what they were seeing in you. They were seeing their friend hurt, or they were seeing that student or their roommate, or they're just seeing the person that you were and are, and they're connecting with that person. They're making your whole self feel valued, not just your performance on the field. And actually that gets into, the sort of the values section of that Revved, because our values sometimes exist within our sport, but they're much deeper than that. And so through your reflection, and this gets into some of our motivation, understanding what's really important to you, what pieces of you and the pieces of the things that you do are really important. Where do they connect? Really your roots. That's what your values are. They're the strongest part of you. They're below the surface, but they're the strongest part. Identifying what those are for yourself so that you can demonstrate, so that's the D here, so that you can then demonstrate behaviors, activities, and engagement that feed those roots and those values. There's a lot of purpose in this Revved Up here that you can kind of gather, and you can take it in a lot of different directions.
Sorry, could you give an example perhaps of a value that someone might have and what that would look like in terms of putting that into action?
Sure. Values can really run the gamut. It can really be anything. What you're asking yourself is what's really important to me on a deep level. Is what's important to me on a deep level of my spirituality, my connection with others, family, financial gains, or financial stability, service to others, things that are on a deeper level, that there's a lot of actions that you can take to kind of engage those. And so it's not about searching for something new. Like I said, sometimes it's about walking yourself through the things that you're already doing and asking yourself, how am I engaging my values? And so, you're not really connecting socially anymore, but you go out to the coffee shop and you say hi to the barista or whatever it may be. And I remember asking a client this at one point, why did you say hi? You weren't really happy. What made you say hi? And they said, oh, I just thought that was kind of the nice thing to do. And I moved on. And I said, how did it make you feel when you said hello? How did it make you feel? Well, it made me feel good. It made me feel like I was connecting with other people, made me feel like I was really being present with that person, like I was supporting that person, or I was seeing that person, or beyond, just fulfilling a lot that I care about. And so we got into this discussion about, well, it might be even beyond how you're feeling. It's clearly really valuable for you to connect with others, relationships, or like something about that is your value, being there for others. Understanding human response or whatever it may be, it's just really important to you. So now I bring that intention and I demonstrate that, and I check in with myself, how did that make me feel? You set the intention and you say, I'm going to connect with this person because connecting with people is really important to me, whatever it may be. And that's how I demonstrate a behavior on a daily basis that connects with what I value.
Yeah, it really connects the dots between the actions that you take and why you do it. And it's almost, it sounds like this, where you're connecting that dot and really living with intention, as you said, I love that word, that brings just a new meaning to why you do the things you do. And I think oftentimes as we go through life, it can sometimes be confusing on why we do those things. And so I really like this exercise that you've mentioned around just how to even process your thoughts and actions and have that conversation with yourself.
Yeah, I really like it. And we can apply it right to sport too, right? Knowing your why, we hear that all the time, is to check in with yourself and reflect on, what is my why? Mm-hmm. So why do I play? Mm-hmm. Why do I engage with my teammates? Why do I want to be successful out here? And it could be anything. It's important to recognize that. It might be your why is that you love your teammates. But imagine going into practice or training the next day, or just jumping on your next Zoom meeting with your team and going with that intention of, I'm here to connect with my teammates because that's what's important to me. I bring that to the field with me. And I say, this is really why I'm here. This is why I feel motivated, or why I want to accomplish my goals.
Definitely, and something I know that I could be doing more of, and really excited to share that as a tool to the MyHuddle community. I mean, you've shared so much here already, Dr. Rubin. If our audience wants to connect further with you, where can they connect with you?
Well, if the audience wants to connect further, I work for Premier Sports Psychology, so they can find us online. I think in the video, wherever you post this, you're going to put up our website, which you can find providers at that website, providers like myself, but you can also find our Premier Mindset program, and that's a really special program. It's all online. And it has elements of everything from education through applied work. And it kind of brings in all the elements we talked about today. So you can engage with that on our website. We also have Instagram and Twitter accounts, which I think you'll link at the bottom. And you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Sports Psych. So that's just for me personally. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think in terms of how we wrap up our interview here, and again, just want to thank you for this time, for the wisdom that you've shared just in our conversation. I can see, how much you are passionate about this and really understand what athletes are facing and have the experience on how to work across that mental health spectrum, which is so important. So thank you again for being here to help demystify mental health in athletics for us. And in terms of these rapid fire questions that I will conclude with, what's one thing you know now about sports psychology that you wish you knew earlier?
It's for everyone.
I love that.
It's for everyone at any stage. Again, like I said, when you're ready. I think sports psych and working with a sports psychologist can make you more ready as well. You can start engaging and it can increase your readiness. You can reflect on yourself and start to understand, where can I grow here? But at any time, it's for everyone.
Second question is, what's one thing that every student athlete should do right now to manage their mental health?
What a good question. Ask yourself, what is most helpful for me right now? I think I love this question because I think it gets at a couple of things. One, you're asking yourself the question. So I can give you a lot of different, I know we wanted to go through a lot of different things. I took a long time to talk about the Revved Up, but I can give you a lot of skills and drills and all those kinds of things that you can work on. But if you don't ask yourself what's needed, or you don't reflect on yourself first, it's going to be hard to put the Band-Aid on top, or it's going to be hard to fix the problem if we haven't, I shouldn't even say fix the problem, but it's going to be hard to address or manage what you're experiencing if we don't really know or aren't aware of what's there. So asking yourself what you need, also really important to you, is going to be what's best. So it gets at asking yourself the question, what's most helpful? We have a perfectionistic mentality in sport. And so when we think about what's right and wrong, what's the right way to manage my stress, or what's the wrong way to do it, I like to kind of break away from that rigidity a little bit, open yourself up to what might be most helpful. Try it out and see, was this helpful for me? So bringing yourself back to the present moment, connecting with yourself, and asking yourself what's most helpful as opposed to what's right and wrong. I love that question. Really important.
Definitely agree with that. And then finally, this is somewhat related, but do you have any advice for student athletes right now, in addition to asking themselves that question?
I would say, I guess this kind of goes back to the beginning, connecting socially, meeting yourself with self-compassion, engage in self-care, whatever that looks like for you, right? What's most helpful for you. I think the one that gets passed around a lot, that it's just important to mention because we haven't mentioned it yet, is to identify what's within your control. That's one that we do spend a lot of time talking about, and it doesn't mean to push aside or ignore or push down the feelings that come up when things are outside of your control. But it is important at times to identify what is within your control and start to engage with that sometimes. That, you know, today, yesterday, 3 weeks from now, it's still important to ask yourself that question. When you ask yourself what's most helpful for you, probably picking something that you can engage in that's within your control is important.
So much knowledge shared here, and I'm extremely grateful for our conversation. That was fantastic, and I know that our audience will get so much benefit from listening to what you shared with us today. So thank you so much, Dr. Rubin, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. I'm so excited for you and this platform that you're extending out to student athletes who, you're right, absolutely face such challenges right now, but also mental health in college athletics and beyond is really stigmatized. So they are lucky to have you and this platform. So myself and Premier Sports Psychology, thanks you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure.